Deliberations and update. It is December 1st, 2022. The time is 9 a.m. I'm calling this meeting to order. In attendance are Commissioners Brooks, Filios, and Duncan. Are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, hearing none. There are no opening remarks, and I will poll for conflicts of interest.
None.
None.
All right. And our signing is our first item, and that is MSF 22-0003, Dolan's Deal, Second Edition, Order of Decision. Vlad, or?
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Vlad Finkel with Kootenai County Community Development. As you recall, this was a 5-lot major subdivision at the intersection of Highway 41 and Highway 54. The board recently heard the director's recommendation for approval of the request because the applicant has complied with the preliminary conditions of approval, and therefore staff recommended approval, and the board agreed with staff's position and approved the request, and we have prepared a decision for you to sign.
Okay, thank you. I would take a motion to execute the order of decision.
Okay, what's the case number?
MSF 22-0003.
Okay, I will move therefore that we execute the order of decision for major subdivision 22-0003. End of motion.
I second the motion.
Chairman Duncan?
Aye.
Bill Brooks?
Aye.
Chairman Filios?
Aye.
All right, motion passes, and I have signed, and Chris and Bill, do I have permission to use your stamp?
Yes, please.
This is Bill. Please use my stamp.
Okay, thank you. All right, on to our deliberations, and this is MSP 21-0008, and this is Bunco Ranch.
Good morning once again. For the record, Vlad Finkel with Kootenai County Community Development. This is a request by Dawn Construction, LLC, and Brian Rush for the approval of a 12-lot major subdivision. The subject property consists of approximately 80 acres in size, and it's located on the north side of Nunn Road, east of Silverwood Theme Park. The subject property is zoned rural, and it is located within the Resource Recreation Comp Plan designation area. The property has some steep slopes. There's a ridge line that's traversing through the property from the southwesterly to the northeasterly portion of the property, bisecting. I wouldn't say it is bisecting the property, but the ridge line is located two-thirds in the two-thirds northern portion of the property. If that's the right way to describe that, Commissioner Duncan. This is the location of the ridge line. This is the south end of the property for the other Commissioners Brooks and Filios. The southern portion of the property that's adjacent to Nunn Road is on a bench, and then there's a ridge line that bisects the property, and then there's the lower portion of the property that's on the north side. This is another view of the property where you can clearly see there's a defined ridge line that bisects the property. This is looking due east. The original request consisted of 16 5-acre parcels of land. It is very rare that through the review process, staff makes a recommendation that the applicant redesign the request to address site conditions that are either steep slopes or other site constraints that would make it very challenging to develop the property. In this case, early on, we advised the applicant that the proposed design would have significant impact on the ridge line that's traversing across the property, and there would be substantial amount of site disturbance. This is the topo map of the subject property. The slopes here clearly exceed 15% grade. And based on the provisions of the Kootenai County Land Use and Development Code, specifically sections 8.6702 and 8.6.706, there are some provisions that clearly discourage the disturbance of steep slopes. Having had that discussion with the applicant, we advised them that we would not be supportive of the application as it was originally presented, and we requested that they modify it to be more in line with the provisions of the code that I just stated. The applicant came back and they decreased the overall density by 25%, and they proposed now 12 lots. What they did was a significant change with that we as a department feel was a good approach to address our concerns, is they extended the proposed interior road, which will be, this will be, I believe, dedicated to the public, and they are creating a cul-de-sac turnaround at the top of the bench with a common driveway that will cross the ridge line and provide access to the 4 southern lots. There are restrictions for having only 4 lots accessing on the north portion of the property. Based on my recollection, the applicant had calculated that there would be close to 50% less site disturbance than the original road design. I think that's the accurate assumption from the engineer, and therefore we believe that the less intensive disturbance on the hillside would be a much better improvement of the overall design. The applicant is proposing to have individual or shared wells serve the lots within the subdivision. Each individual well would, individual wells would be just serving the lots that they're located on. However, if there are shared wells proposed, they will have associated wellhead and distribution line easements benefiting the adjoining parcels of land. They're also proposing individual septic systems as well. This is an aerial overlay of the property in question. Based on the wetlands map and the analysis provided by the wetland biologist, there are 2 wetland areas located in the northwest corner of the property. The applicant did designate them on the face of plat and provided a buffer consistent with the recommendation of the wetland biologist. These are some of the photos of the property in question. This is Nunn Road. These are some of the photos facing north, looking at the property. The lower 2 slides, Chair Duncan, are of the ridge line and the steep slopes that I discussed earlier in my presentation. Through the agency comment period, we did receive comments that were fairly much in support of the application with appropriate conditions or recommendations for mitigation of impacts. Therefore, we don't find there to be any concerns with the latest design of 12 residential lots. We did receive 3 comments in opposition of the request. Staff believes that the cumulative effect of the newly proposed wells on site, the public concerns were with respect to the cumulative impact of the proposed well on site, as well as the need to provide additional clarification regarding groundwater supply. Staff believes that the proposed development is compatible with surrounding development, even though it's located within the resource recreational designation of the comprehensive plan. But there are parcels in the area that are 5 acres in size, and therefore we believe that this design is not going to have, it's not going to be so different or incompatible that it would create an enormous impact on the adjoining community. We believe that the applicant needs to comply with the conditions of approval and construct the shared infrastructure improvements. The hearing examiner heard this request on 2 different dates. One was on October 6th, and then the second one was on November 3rd. There was a request from one of the members of the public for the applicant to provide additional clarification from the professional geologist addressing the cumulative effect of the drawdown from the proposed wells on the adjoining parcels of land, which the applicant did come back on November 3rd and provide clarification with that in that regard. Please be mindful that the recommendations or the analysis by a professional geologist are just they're not exact science. It's more or less of a collection of data from other well sources and assessment of soil conditions and so on. So it's not an exact science. And the code just says that you need to provide, convincing evidence that water is feasible and it's not going to have effect on the adjoining parcels. And subsequent to that, the hearing examiner, of course, recommended approval of the request with the conditions set forth in the hearing examiner's recommendation. I stand for any questions that you have.
Okay, any questions for Vlad?
I don't have a question so much as a comment. When I'm not able to be there, I follow on YouTube, so I can see what you're talking about, Vlad, and any other staff members.
Yeah, he can see, is what he's saying, right? Isn't
I
that?
can see.
Yes, he can. He can see because he follows on YouTube.
Seeing that on YouTube.
Understood.
Yeah. Okay. Chris? Chris, are you on mute? We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I just unmuted. Where is the proposed site with respect to the aquifer?
The subject property is off the aquifer. The aquifer is directly to the west and northwest. So it's, if I can describe the map, it would be like an alcove. It would be located within like an alcove of the groundwater, the aquifer map. So the aquifer map is further towards Silverwood as well as Athol, if that makes sense.
So this is
Understood. Okay, so how is the applicant expected to demonstrate adequate water supply?
What the applicant has done is they have submitted evidence from their professional geologist addressing the ability to have a minimum of 5 gallons for a period of 4-hour flow with a minimum of 1,500 gallons per day flow at each residence with either a newly proposed well or a reservoir that would provide sufficient flow rate. And in addition to that, Commissioner Filios, I'd like to point out that there is a condition of approval. Just a minute, let me find it, please. There is a condition of approval in their recommendation. It's condition 7.10 that states the applicant shall place the following restriction on the face of plat in compliance with the groundwater quantity report submitted by WNR Group as stated in Exhibit A5. And the disclaimer will read, the applicant future property owner shall construct an on-site engineered storage consisting of a 3,000-gallon cistern for lots with a single dedicated well and a 5,000-gallon cistern for a shared well serving 2 lots to minimize stress on each of the homes. Kootenai County Community Development will not issue a certificate of occupancy for the primary residence on site until construction of a water storage reservoir has been verified. So this disclaimer on the face of plat is to protect the future occupants of each one of those lots to make sure that there's sufficient flow rate based on the well production as well as the reservoir on each of the lots.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, with no further questions, is there a motion? I didn't find anything in here that was a cause for concern. I think that with the conditions on it, it's going to be a fine project.
Yeah, I think I'm generally okay with it. I think as long as the conditions of approval are met, I think we're fine. So I don't have any real issues with it. I think the developer has demonstrated the willingness to make the necessary adjustments. Okay, I'll make a motion therefore that with respect to case number, correct me please if I'm wrong, MSP 22-0008, was that correct?
It's 21. It's MSP 21-0008.
Okay, so I'll accept the correction as amended by Chair Duncan to read MSP 21-0008, that the project be approved as presented, consistent with the conditions of approval as addressed and enumerated by staff. End of motion.
I second the motion and would add, I appreciate the work of community development in researching these things, so I can vote on these things with some decent confidence. I really do.
I agree. Thank you.
Chairman Duncan,
Aye.
Bill Brooks,
Aye.
Commissioner Filios,
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Item number 2, this is a conditional use permit, 22-0011 Canfield Storage Water Facility. And Vlad, is this you as well?
Correct. This is a request by City of Coeur d'Alene Water Department. The applicant is requesting a public utility complex facility to construct a water tower to provide sufficient water pressure for the community in the area. Based on the application submitted by the applicant, or the narrative that they submitted, they have described that there have been historically issues with adequate water pressure, especially in the summer months during the irrigation period, and therefore they have been actively searching for this property for quite some time. I think it may have been a decade, until they were able to find the appropriate site to develop this type of facility. As I recall, based on the hearing examiner's hearing, the applicant testified that there are at least 2 different physical features that they're looking for. A is that they have adequate elevation on which to place this type of facility on, and B is to construct it in the manner so that it would be least intrusive from a visual standpoint to the neighboring community. So this site is located off Thomas Lane, and it's located at the base of Canfield Mountain. Based on the Google map, you can see that this is a heavily vegetated site, and it does have significant slopes. The subject property is approximately 3.3 acres in size, and it's zoned agricultural suburban. Agricultural suburban zone does allow for these types of facilities through the conditional use permit process. The comp plan designation is transitional, and there are provisions in the transitional zone that allow for facilities that support residential and non-residential uses. However, the transitional zoning also states that those uses shall be easily conveyed, or excuse me, not conveyed, but easily annexed into the city limits at such time that the area becomes part of the city. The property is also located within the area of city impact. As you may know, commissioners, anytime a property is located within the City of Coeur d'Alene area of city impact, staff is obligated to notify them of the proposal. Being that it's the city that's requesting this, it didn't make any sense to request any further action from their engineering department. This is the proposed project. The proposed water storage facility will be a 1 million gallon standpipe style storage tank. It will be approximately 90 feet tall and 60 feet in diameter. It will be almost centrally located on site. The applicant is proposing to have a vehicular driveway for maintenance vehicles, which will be cut into the hillside. There will be significant cut into the hillside, but the applicant will remediate the site and replant the areas that will be disturbed, that will ultimately in the future grow into a buffer to obscure the base of the pipe itself. I would like to add that, as you can see, there's also a trail on this property. I don't know if the commissioners recall, but a couple of years ago there was discussion by Director Callahan in conjunction with the request by the former owner of this property that It was called the Canfield Master Plan or Can Course for hiking trails that the city had acquired, and the purchase agreement or the contingency for the purchase of this property was to have the city improve the hiking trails on this site. Please be mindful that the hiking trails and accessibility for pedestrians is not part of this conditional use permit. It's just a additional information on outside of the CUP in terms of the proposed improvements by the city. So we're not looking at any of the Can Course improvements. There's not going to be any parking, vehicular parking associated with that recreational use of the site, but there will be maintenance parking for the proposed public utility complex facility. These are some of the photos of the subject property in question. As I mentioned earlier, it is a very steep site, and there's going to be significant amount of disturbance. We did receive a great number of photo simulations from the city. I think they had done an excellent job of depicting the existing and proposed conditions in terms of site disturbance and location of the tower from various angles, looking south, looking west, looking north, as well as northwest. There is going to be some bare ground for some time because of the level of disturbance, but the trees that will be planted on the hillside will help stabilize the hillside as well as provide for a future vegetative buffer at the base of the mountain. We did solicit comments from various agencies. It appears that really there was no concerns or opposition. Therefore, staff does not see this being problematic. In fact, we believe that this is going to be a huge benefit to the community for provision of adequate water pressure in the area. We did receive one comment in support and one comment with concerns at the public hearing before the hearing examiner on November 3rd. There were a couple of adjoining property owners that did raise concerns with respect to the aesthetics of this proposed facility, being that it's going to be enormous and it's just going to be something that's going to be highly visible from their site. But as the applicant had explained, they had searched for this property to make sure that the elevation would provide adequate water pressure, as well as tuck it into the hillside in a manner where it's not going to be highly visible. It's not going to protrude so much above the tree line that it's going to be noticeable further out in the community. And they're going to paint it neutral color. I think it's going to be green to blend in with the existing forest in the area. We believe that, as I stated, this is a huge benefit for the community. We ask that the board approves this request. The hearing examiner heard this on November 3rd and subsequently recommended approval. I stand for any questions that you have.
Okay, Bill, Chris, questions?
I have no questions.
Chris?
Yeah, I think it's adequately addressed. I think Vlad's done a good job, and staff in general has done a really good job, as has the city, so I have no questions.
Okay. I too believe that with the conditions, it should be approved. So I would take a motion. Is it easier if I just make the motion since I've got the paper?
Sure. Go ahead.
I move that we approve CUP 22-0011 Canfield Water Storage Facility for City of Coeur d'Alene.
I second the motion.
Chairman Duncan?
Aye.
Bill Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Filios?
And what I would add is I think it's a good job by staff in the city. I also want to point out that as much as we're all concerned about our individual views, if we have any, they're clearly not protected in the state of Idaho. Views or view sheds or view easements have to be negotiated with neighbors, but I commend the city for doing the best they can to at least try and address that concern. And as to the water situation itself, which is the crux of the matter, I think, once again, the city needs to be commended because we're going to have it appears increasingly more water shortages and challenges that we're going to have to address. So my vote is yes to approve.
All right. Project is approved. And now we can go on to number 3, CUP 22-0006 North Hayden Storage.
Once again, for the record, Vlad Finkel, last but not least. This is a request for the expansion of an existing warehouse facility by North Hayden Storage LLC, case number CP 22-0006. The subject property is located on the north side of Kootenai County at the intersection of Ohio Match Road and Old Highway 95. The subject property comprises of 3 parcels of land. Some background history. I was the original planner on the approval of the original request by the former owner, Mr. Stark, in 2016. The subject request was over the entire property, but subsequently the property was subdivided and the new owner repurchased the 2 southern parcels in order to accommodate the proposed expansion. The property is located, let me briefly discuss the physical features of the property. The property is fairly level. It has been recently logged by the applicant to make room for the newly proposed buildings on site. There is a vegetative buffer along Old Highway 95. However, the property has been stripped of any vegetation on the west end of the property that abuts residential neighborhood to the west. There are 10 buildings on the northern portion of the property above the man-made drainage area. There are 10 storage buildings, 8 that are fairly large in size, I think close to 12,000 square feet, as well as 2 6,000 square foot buildings on the west end of the property. There is an existing office building on the property that a portion of which has been converted into habitable space for the caretakers' quarters. It has been recently discovered by staff, and the applicant has been asked to address all of the building permits associated with the conversion of that portion of the property for habitable use. The entire property is zoned rural, and it is located within the agricultural suburban designation under the Kootenai County Comprehensive Plan. The comprehensive plan does allow for non-residential uses that support residential community in the area. Just to clarify, every time we get a request for an expansion of an existing use, I think it becomes less of a concern for compatibility reasons, because once a use is established and it hasn't posed any issues in terms of code violations or other concerns, we believe that the expansion of it doesn't really generate a lot more, concerns in terms of mitigation, but rather mitigation for physical impacts such as traffic, water, sewer, and so on. We, in fact, didn't receive any concerns in opposition of this request. We already spoke about the existing improvements. I forgot to mention that the original request had gone through a minor modification to change the number of buildings as well as their sizes. In 2020, the original request was approved under case number CUP 16-0010. Director Callahan in 2020 approved a minor modification. Pursuant to Kootenai County Land Use and Development Code, the director has the discretion to approve some minor modifications that may have been requested by the applicant that are slightly different from the original approval by the board. However, this request is a significant change because the applicant is adding a total of 9 additional buildings, which is almost doubling the size of the original request over the 2 southern parcels. There will be 9 buildings ranging from 11,300 square feet to 11,700 square feet. And as I said before, a portion of the existing office building is converted into habitable space. These are some of the photos. As you can see, there is a vegetative buffer along Old Highway 95 on the east side of the property. But we are requesting that the applicant revegetate a portion of the, or a strip of land along the western portion of the property to create a buffer. This has been greatly discussed at the examiner's hearing on November 17th. and the applicant has agreed to remediate that area for aesthetics reasons. These are some more photos of the property. These are some storage areas. Yep, the property is fairly bare at this point, but it's going to be the area for future aisleways and storage buildings. We did solicit comments from agencies. The access to the subject property will remain at the existing location on the north end of the project site. There will be an emergency access further south, accessing Highway 95. The Highway District had no concerns. There will be a need for further fire suppression, not a problem from the applicant's standpoint, building permits and septic system expansion improvements that I believe the applicant has applied for to accommodate habitable space within the office building. No public comments. This is pretty rare, but really no concerns. And as I said before, this is really a non-issue for the expansion. We believe the applicant should comply with all the agency comments, go through the permitting process to do the conversion as well as do the landscaping for aesthetics reasons. And the hearing examiner heard this request on November 17th and subsequently agreed with staff to approve the request. So I stand for any questions that you have at this time.
Thanks, Bill. Chris, questions for Vlad?
I have no question.
Yeah, I think I just have one. Vlad, with reference to the limited vegetative buffer,
Yes, sir.
I guess there could be some changes. Are the changes that you indicated to provide the buffer to the residential area?
Can you clarify your question, please?
Yeah, you mentioned early on in your presentation that there was a limited vegetative buffer, but the buffer was going to be pretty much confined to one of the major routes in the area and not necessarily to the neighboring residential area. But later in your presentation, you indicated that they were going to add or amend or
Correct.
change the buffer. Is that between the proposed location and the current residential area?
Correct, to the west. So as you can, I don't know, Commissioner Filios, if you can see the slide. I don't know if you're on Zoom, but the applicant's request included a site plan with landscaping where they, as I understand, they contemplated retaining the existing vegetation along the west portion of the property. However, as described by the applicant at the HE hearing, is when they were logging the property to make room for new buildings and aisleways, due to wind and some trees that have been, I guess, dying off or have blown over from wind, they ended up removing the entire vegetative area along the western portion of the property. Staff and the hearing examiner felt that it was imperative for them to vegetate that strip along the western portion to create a landscape buffer from the adjoining residential development to the west, especially when there's limited vegetation on those residential parcels. And I think I believe the applicant has agreed to that. I think it makes sense to do that, and we have provisions in our code that clearly state when you have less intensive uses that abut a more intensive uses, that certain screening buffering accommodations shall be made to make the project more compatible.
Okay, thank you. You've answered my question. No further questions.
I think that this expansion is fine. It's not going to cause any additional issues for the neighborhood, since I happen to be one of the neighbors. So, yes. Any thoughts on that, or are you ready for a motion?
I move that we approve. I'm sorry. I'm ready. I move that we approve CUP 22-0006 North Hayden Storage.
Second.
Chairman Duncan,
Aye.
Bill Brooks,
Aye.
Commissioner Filios,
Aye.
All right, project passes. Thank you. Now on to our business section of the meeting. Our first one is a consideration of whether to grant a public hearing for case number APP 22-0003, which is an appeal from a director's decision. So I will go ahead and let Director Callahan lead us in this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. This item was an appeal of my determination to approve a minor subdivision. At issue are covenants, which one side says prohibit the minor subdivision, the other side says should allow. That was the crux of the issue that went to the hearing examiner. The hearing examiner found that we should not have approved this minor subdivision, and that's his recommendation to you. The land use code gives you an option. You can review the hearing examiner's decision and summarily decide based on that, or you can decide to have another public hearing. The attorney for the owner of the property, Scott Poorman, has requested that you have another public hearing, and customarily the board has granted those hearings in these kinds of situations.
I hate granting more public hearings. Not that I love hearing from the public, but sometimes we get a little overwhelmed with these things. Yeah, it seems logical and reasonable in this situation. So thoughts, Bill, Chris?
I think we should go ahead and grant a public hearing.
You know, the first option that Director Callahan mentioned was our reviewing, the decision of the hearing examiner?
Yes.
I'd rather take that approach. I think, I would just rather take that approach before granting a public hearing. Is it an either or, David? Is that it?
Yes, you can decide to make a decision just based on the hearing examiner's response, but two of you need to go there.
Sure. So I guess I have some more questions then. Because the hearing examiner ruled that it should be reversed, what if we don't agree with the hearing examiners, and then that means we have to have a second public hearing?
Pat's on the line. Let's ask him. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I'm here, and Director Callahan has correctly framed the issue as far as whether you can summarily make a decision which could agree with the hearing examiner's recommendation or not agree with the hearing examiner's recommendation based on the evidence currently in the record, including that taken at the hearing before the hearing examiner. Or you can grant a de novo appeal hearing before the board. And to be honest, I would recommend the latter just from a due process standpoint, to be fair to all parties.
But then, Pat, go ahead, Chris.
Pat, when you say the latter, you mean a public hearing?
Yeah, an appeal hearing.
Right.
So once again, Pat, if we disagree with the hearing examiner's outcome, that means we would have to have a second public hearing?
Not necessarily.
Okay. All right, then I would be in favor of the hearing. I'm trying to just get one hearing out of this and not two or three. So if we can disagree with the hearing examiner's conclusion at that one public hearing and not cause a second public hearing, then I'm definitely in favor of going forward with that. David?
Yeah, and that would be a final decision of the board appealable to district court. They would have whoever or the parties would have exhausted their administrative remedies at that point.
Okay. David?
Just to be clear, it's also true that if two of you want to go forward with a decision on the hearing examiner's write-up and reverse the hearing examiner, in other words, approve that we were correct in approving this, you can do that. That's your call.
But wouldn't that cause a public hearing? Because anytime okay,
Not in my, Pat needs to weigh in, but that's not my understanding.
okay.
I think here I agree with Pat, though.
Yeah,
You have an attorney
right.
that's asked for this hearing.
Sure. Okay.
And it's-
Yeah, and with the county attorney concurring with that request, I would just say yes. You could make a decision on the record as it stands that disagrees with the hearing examiner's recommendation. At that point, it would also be final and appealable to district court. But I will say that I think you're more likely to draw a due process challenge from one party or the other if you do that. I think the safest route from a procedural standpoint is to have the hearing before the board and then make a final decision at that point.
All right. And then at this point, it's not going to be until January or February.
Right.
Yeah,
It's whenever we can schedule.
Correct.
sure. All right. So, Bill, do you still say yes to the hearing?
Yes.
Okay. I agree too. Chris, any other thoughts?
No, with all due respect to our attorney, I think we take due process to a tortured level. I think one hearing before a board or before a hearing examiner, I think what happens is when people discover that they can torture the process and get what they want, we're going to be faced with multiple. Well, I won't because I'm not going to be around long, but multiple public hearings over a single case, and I think at that point it's torturing due process. I think due process is afforded when people, the opportunity to come before us. In this case, they're not being denied that due process unless, of course, we wind up with the situation that we disagree with the hearing examiner. So I'm in favor with proceeding with a review of the hearing examiner's decision.
All right. So there's 2 votes for a public hearing. So staff has their direction in this. Pat, this does not need a motion, does it?
I would go ahead and make the motion, especially given that it's presumably a 2-to-1 decision. It should be on the record as such.
Then I move that we grant a public hearing to appeal number APP 22-0003.
I second the motion.
Chairman Duncan,
Aye.
Bill Brooks,
Aye.
Commissioner Filios,
Nay.
All right. Staff knows how to proceed now. And then item number 2, rescheduling the public hearing for CUP 22-0004, which is a reconsideration hearing. And David, you'll...
Commissioners, that's something of a misnomer. The rescheduling part is really just something I wanted to have a discussion on today. Let me back up and set the stage for this CUP. You'll recall this is the one on the cell tower that Vlad handled. And there's 2 different aspects of this I just wanted you to be aware of because we've scheduled this for a December 29th hearing in the usual and customary way, meaning we look for the first available hearing date that you and everyone could make work. And so the 29th was the one. It also fit nicely with the fact that we would have this in front of the board that heard it in the first place. Our understanding is that's good legal practice, but I'll defer to our legal counsel for that comment. But nonetheless, where I'm going with this is even though we did this in the customary way, we're now hearing from multiple residents in the area that they can't make the 29th. They're frustrated and they'd like for you to reschedule to a different hearing date. What we would normally do in this situation, since we've already scheduled and already noticed, is just go ahead and have the hearing on the 29th, and then you can decide if you want to have the hearing that night and continue it or not. That's a board's discretionary call. So I just wanted you to be aware of that, be thinking about it. In your shoes, I'd be inclined to ask my legal counsel, either in executive session or face-to-face, one-on-one, I mean, opinions on that. Also, there's another separate weirdness to this I want you to be thinking about between now and the 29th. Normally, we just have one appellate. In this particular case, we have Norm Shemenko representing 30 some odd residents, but 2 of those 30-something residents have also appealed the decision. So you have 3 total appellates. The weirdness that creates, in my view, is now you have a situation where normally you would allow 30 minutes, customarily, I mean, for the appellant to make their case. Here you need to decide, are you going to do that 3 times, or going to hold, or just hold the 30 limit and let the applicants divide up their time amongst themselves. I just want you to be thinking about that ahead of time, because it's an issue we have to decide.
Okay. So can we talk about this again in a week?
And, or you could talk with Pat now, or Pat can advise you if he thinks you ought to go into executive session.
Pat?
Yeah, I think we can talk about it here. I don't think there's a need for executive session unless the board feels strongly that way. I think, although it's preferable to have a reconsideration in front of the same board that originally heard it, it's not mandatory. There will still be 2 commissioners on this board that will be on the next board. And certainly the new commissioner can get up to speed reviewing the record, reviewing audio or video of the original hearing. So I don't think it's really legally problematic. I think it's just a matter of whether you want this to be heard in front of the 3 of you before Chris's term ends, and also just the logistics of potentially canceling the hearing on the 29th, or just perfunctorily beginning the hearing and then immediately continuing it to a date certain or uncertain, and possibly hearing the testimony of whoever's there. In terms of the multiple appellants, I think normally the appellant would get 30 minutes if there is a single appellant. I would suggest that you allow maybe 15, 20 to 20 minutes per appellant in this case, and then the county and AT&T's representative can give their respective cases, and then maybe 5 minutes per appellant for rebuttal would be my suggested order of hearing. So with those considerations, it is within the board's discretion to keep it on the 29th or reschedule it, or leave it for the 29th and then continue it to a date certain to accommodate the people that have requested the change.
The only problem I have with continuing to date certain is it going to be before January 9th? Because then you're going to have a second board hear it anyway, if it's not, rescheduled the very next week.
Probably
So,
not.
I agree.
yeah.
Correct.
So, Pat, are you going to be able to attend in person on the 29th?
Yes, I've already made that arrangement, even though I noticed Mr. Shemenko asked for an extension because he had a vacation plan this week. Well, I had a vacation plan that week, and I agreed to, take time away from that to attend this hearing and attend in person if necessary, and I think it is necessary in this case.
Yeah, that's the point I was getting to. So Director Callahan and our planner, Vlad, also had vacation planned that week. So I don't know. I'm struggling with this one. I like expediency and getting things done, but now we've had requests on the appellant side. So I don't know, Bill, what is your thought on this?
Well, everybody wants a decision, but everybody wants a decision on their timeline. And I think we have to be reasonably sensitive to that, but we can't be overly sensitive. And given the time of the year, I think it is appropriate. And I don't think there's apparently any problem with dealing with this with the new commissioner coming in. And I would recommend that.
Okay. So, Pat, if you think that's, appropriate and it's not going to cause any issues, then I would be okay with putting it off, rescheduling it from that week. So,
Yeah, that's fine with me.
okay.
If I could, this is Chris. If I can weigh in, I would recommend that we keep the date of the 29th. If there are certain individuals who can't make it, they can certainly submit their comments in writing. Actually, I prefer that because it gives me more time to digest rather than taking, notes real time as we go through a public hearing. So either way, they're not disadvantaged. As to the second question regarding the attorneys, if we're getting 3 appellants, my feeling is if we were going to normally allocate 20 or 30 minutes for the appellant's attorney, then we do the same in this case and let the 3 attorneys get together and figure out how they want to parse that 20 or 30 minutes. Do they want to take 10 minutes apiece? If it's 30 minutes, or do they want to designate one to speak for all 3? I mean, what if we had a situation where we had 5 or 6? I think at some point it becomes unreasonable, and I think it's entirely reasonable to hold to the 20 or 30 minutes and let them figure out how they want to handle it. Bearing in mind that, the appellant, well, in this case, it would be the respondent, I guess, which would be AT&T, should be afforded essentially the same amount of time. So, once again, I would hold to the 29th. I think the same board should hear it. Not that we have to, but I think it's the right way to proceed. And then secondly, I think that the 3 attorneys need to figure out amongst themselves and be held to a time limit of not to exceed 30 minutes. I'm done.
Bill, does that change anything about rescheduling the hearing for you?
No, it really doesn't, because the process is still the process, and if it's not illegal to do, and it affords everybody what they want, that is some time. I really I wish they would consolidate this, but if they're not able or willing to, I think we need to give. This is a lot of people are very concerned about this, and I think we need to give it a full opportunity for people to speak. Pro and con. So I'm very interested in that, and I think that would necessitate rescheduling the hearing.
Okay, so you've got 2 to agree. Pat, do we need to make a motion for that?
Yeah, in this case, I would once again.
Okay, so that's fine. Then I guess what I would also say is rescheduling this hearing may give the 3 appellants the opportunity to combine. Give them a little bit more time to hopefully come to consensus. Go ahead.
I'll give them a call and have the discussion.
Okay,
I have no idea if they're going to be willing to consolidate.
sure. Okay,
Given the way this is played out, my guess is they will not.
okay.
But
Well, we are willing to accommodate their concerns. I wish they would reconsider whether they could put this together in a way that makes sense for everybody.
Yeah.
Well, and the question that I have, I guess, and this is for Pat, if they choose not to consolidate, does that mean that every member of the public gets 3 opportunities to comment?
No, they don't get three opportunities to comment. They would have one opportunity to comment either through their attorney, if
Okay.
applicable, or individually.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, and then the only other thing is you have a 30-day posting.
There's that, and since we've already noticed, I want to make sure I'm understanding you right. Are you saying we would not have the 29th? And
Correct.
instead have a different date?
Correct.
Okay, we're going to.
That's correct.
On top of that, too.
Sure.
Yeah, we would have to send out, a notice of, rescheduled public or appeal hearing. Hearing on the request for reconsideration.
Right.
So are you thinking it would be after my term of office has expired?
At this point, yes,
I think
Chris.
it would have to be because of the 30-day notice.
Well, today is 28 days from the original hearing on the. If we did it for the following week, we could. If we did it for the following week, we could still renotice in time.
Okay.
But I don't know what the board and community development schedule is.
We have a hearing on the 5th
Oh, they already have a hearing on the 5th.
in front of the hearing.
Is that
From
the hearing
In the
examiner?
morning or in the evening?
Yeah, it's the hearing examiner on the 5th, so we would have a location
hearing
issue.
examiner. Okay, that's right.
Unless they want to.
Right.
We could work with your staff in scheduling a special meeting.
Okay. Okay. I don't know. I'm thinking about leaving us a little bit of flexibility at this point. So here's a motion I would make. I move that in all practicality, if CUP 22-0004 reconsideration hearing can be moved, considering schedules of all parties involved, that it do so to January.
I second the motion.
Chairman Duncan,
Aye.
Bill Brooks,
Aye.
Commissioner Filios,
Nay?
All right, staff has their
Thank you, Commissioner.
opportunity, and then we'll, as things come up, just let us know. But at this point, we can keep the 29th if we can't make it work better. I mean, we're not,
It's true.
yeah, so. Okay, well, please let us know and if that works, but does the hearing examiner have 2 hearings in January?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
that leaves two open weeks.
Right.
Because I know we already have a hearing on one of those nights.
We have 2 projects before the hearing examiner
Right.
on January 5th,
Okay,
so we can't reschedule those.
sure. Okay, thank you, and with no further discussion, 9:58, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.